Welcome to State of Reform's virtual series, 5 Slides We're Discussing, with some of healthcare's most thoughtful leaders. And now, the host of State of Reform, DJ Wilson.
All right. My name is DJ Wilson, one of the hosts here at State of Reform, and I just am super excited to have you with us. We've got a big group of folks here today, about 150 of us in the room, and I know we're excited to jump in and get this conversation started. So without further ado, I want to introduce our esteemed guests here. We've got a number of thoughtful, informed voices on this topic, and I'm excited to jump into it. First off is Elizabeth Ripley. She's the CEO of the Matsu Health Foundation. We have Tracy Fu, MD, the Vaccine Medical Director at Pfizer, and of course, the incomparable Ann Zink, MD, the Chief Medical Officer for the state of Alaska. Thank you guys for being here and for being patient with me as I have to sing and dance a little bit. Tracy, let me start with you. You cover vaccine, and rather you're the Vaccine Medical Director for Pfizer in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Northwest region. Tell us, what are you spending your mental energy on these days as you're at work at Pfizer?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, and happy to be here. So most of my days have been taken up. I'm helping to coordinate some trainings for our healthcare providers around use of our vaccines. There's different formulations for the pediatric population. There's a new formulation that's a do not dilute formulation. So my time is really taken up with creating and kind of coordinating trainings.
It's you got a lot going on for the last couple of years. I think more than normal, as many of us do. And you've had a lot going on for the last couple of years, maybe more than normal. Also, tell us about the kind of stuff you're spending your mental energy on at the state of Alaska.
Yeah, we're spending a lot of time on the mission of the department, which is to make Alaskans as healthy and well as they possibly can be. So we're really celebrating Healthy You 2022, where every quarter we're highlighting a different key component to our health. This is the quarter of physical education. But in that is all sorts of other things that make us healthy and well, including understanding communicable diseases like COVID. A lot of people know me from COVID, but there are a lot of other things we do. So really our focus is the overall health and well-being of Alaskans.
Good. And Elizabeth, we first met, you were on our keynote stage back in 2011, I believe, at our first State of Reform conference in Alaska. Thanks for sticking with us. And let me ask you, tell us what you're working on these days and what's commanding your attention.
Thanks, DJ. I appreciate the chance to be here. We our vision is that all Matsu residents have an opportunity for a healthy life. And so we're really doubling down and trying to center equity in our work and really understand the different vulnerable populations across our community and how they have that opportunity or don't have that opportunity, and the barriers that exist in some of our systems and our thinking and our narratives that really confound people having a chance to have that opportunity for a healthy life. We're doing work at the personal, interpersonal, and organizational level with our board and our staff on this equity journey, and it's taken a lot of mental energy and totally worth the effort.
You know, I wonder, Elizabeth, this is before we get into our conversation. Oh, that's more audio kerfuffles on our end. I wonder, Elizabeth, as you think about health policy in the state of Alaska, you know, we're talking today, obviously, with Ann, who hails from the Matsu. The governor comes from the Matsu. It seems like the Matsu is playing an outsized role in health policy in the state of Alaska. Do you feel like, do you see it that way? And I wonder what you think. I'm wondering if you must take some pride in that, given the fact, not that you elected Governor Dunleavy, not that you train medically Ann Zink, but you've really had an outsized role yourself in the health policy of the state of Alaska. What do you make of it all?
Well, it's a very generous compliment, DJ. I do think over time, though, Matsu has been more and more influential in this space. And I think that, we have a theory of change at the Matsu Health Foundation, which is really, taking an epidemiological approach to our work, which is really looking at the root causes of the symptoms and challenges that we have downstream and trying to address those upstream, but also anchoring that work in community with community voice And what we find is when we give community the data and the good science and the facts, the community runs with that story. They understand the story better, and then they change how they behave in the story. And Dr. Zink's been a great partner in that work, and just has done nothing but continue to increase her agency and her participation in moving forward the health of our community in so many ways. So just really grateful to work with champions like Dr. Zink to carry the work forward.
We have the luxury today of living in this time of COVID where we're all doing this stuff virtually. And we have packed in a few extra gremlins in our technology today. If you are having an issue watching this, we will have all of this recorded and available at our website at stateofreform.com. You can come back and, of course, watch it later because it keeps kind of being tricky there for me. Likewise, I also want to invite you to offer any of your questions or your comments in our chat box here at the right of your screen. I will do my best to integrate those into the conversation and of course, love constructive, engaged feedback. The idea of our 5 slides series here is that we are going to live in the space of this COVID virtual world and use multimedia as a tool to really elevate the conversations around this safe table, the kind of safe table that we try to create here at State Reform. So we've asked each of our guests to bring a slide graphic with them so that we can dig into that data and dig into the materials that they brought, and then sort of wrestle with those together in conversation. So this first slide that we have is one that we've contributed to the conversation, our team here at State Reform. And you'll see that on this all comes from, I should say, the U.S. Census Department and its household pulse survey. They have been asking Alaskans and asking Americans in every state about their well-being and about their healthcare economically, their health status, their economic health, their familial health, their mental health, et cetera, ever since the pandemic started. And so this comes every 2 weeks, and this data is from the most recent batch on January 10th. And it shows, I think, good news that the vast majority of Alaskans have begun their pathway towards vaccination with 1 dose, 2 doses, or 3 doses. And that there are an array of array of reasons why people are still hesitating to become vaccinated. So on the left, you see the status of vaccination. On the right of this graphic, you'll see the reasons why those who have not been vaccinated still hesitate to become vaccinated. And there's a mix. People are able to choose all of the explanations that apply. It strikes me, and that the top reasons here are really all medical information in nature, the top 3 or 4. Those are things that strike me that they're not really political, though they may be politicized, but they seem to be much more, they seem to be topics that we can address and approach through just conversation. What are your thoughts when you see this data slide?
Yeah, no, I think that we've seen this for a long time with vaccines. I like to think a lot about building vaccine confidence and not about vaccine hesitancy. I think it's really important to have good questions. I think it's really important to be concerned about side effects and don't believe in the vaccine or don't trust it, and to get the information and resources that you need to feel confident in making that decision. And so one of the things we do in the state government is just trying to make sure that your healthcare provider has access to that information, that they understand how the safety process works, that adverse side effects are reported and we're able to report those back in, so that healthcare providers and individuals understand that decision, and really finding ways to really encourage that healthcare provider as well as that patient to have a really robust, meaningful conversation about your concerns, and making sure that you're getting it from trustworthy sources. I still practice in the emergency department, and it is fascinating to me, in the conversations that I have, people have great questions. They have really good reasons for having hesitancy and fear. And when you're able to sit down and talk to them about what those look like and how, what you know and your information, that's what we do as a doctor. Someone comes with chest pain, they don't need to know the answer for that. That's why I've studied it. But my job isn't to tell them what to do in their life. My job is to share with them the information about their heart disease, have them share with me their concerns, their history, and that we find a path forward together that promotes their overall health and well-being. And I see the same with vaccines. So I think we just need to continue having those conversations with our healthcare provider.
Elizabeth, of course, one of the reasons on this slide is that people just cannot access the vaccine. I know maybe in Anchorage or in some of our metropolitan areas, that might be a foreign concept to some folks, but certainly in the bush or in a lot of the smaller villages, it's a very reasonable hurdle. How do you see vaccine hesitation play out across geography in the Mat-Su, since it's such a geographically diverse place?
That's a great question. I mean, Mat-Su does have the lowest vaccination rate in the state at 41%. And we definitely know that access plays a role in the more remote parts of our borough. They have less access for sure to testing, as well as vaccinations. We had an opportunity, all 4 jurisdictions in the Mat-Su borough passed on over 5.1 million in CDC funding to the Health Foundation last year, actually last July, for us to really try to work on increasing that access to vaccinations. And we tried to do that, across the borough. So whether it was in the eastern parts of our borough in Chickaloon or Sutton or north toward Talkeetna and Trapper Creek, we really tried to make sure those funds landed in different places with different providers to address access to vaccinations.
Tracy, I wonder if there are some observations about Alaska in general that you might offer about the conversation around vaccine uptake and hesitancy, and how Alaska might compare to some of the other states in which you're working.
I mean, I think a lot of the challenges that Alaska is seeing is very similar across the country, and really what Dr. Zink mentioned in terms of vaccine confidence is really key, and using those trusted sources and trusted resources. And exactly like she was saying, she took the words right out of my mouth, around, talking to your healthcare provider. I understand if, populations don't have a lot of trust in the government, et cetera, but going to those trusted sources and getting that information that you need to make the decision is really important. And I think, that's really key. And that's what we've been trying to work when we're talking to healthcare providers around the topic of vaccine confidence is really just making sure healthcare providers are prepared to have those conversations and, understand the data and can have those conversations with patients to help them really feel more comfortable in getting vaccinated.
I was reflecting, Anne, on an article produced by NPR back early in the pandemic in 2020, when Governor Dunleavy said you give him just the facts, and you've built a reputation for giving just the facts and letting people form their own political opinion as a result. Why don't we jump into the slide that you've brought and walk us through what you have going on here?
Yeah, thanks so much, DJ. I really kind of focus this slide and really the role of state government, not as my role as my provider, just because that's really my role as a public health provider. First thing I just wanted to mention is I think it's been really easy to think about this pandemic in dichotomous or black and white ways. I'm sick or I'm not sick. I'm vaccinated or I'm not vaccinated. And the reality is science is not a body of knowledge. Science is a process, and it is constantly evolving and changing and moving. And it is challenging in that space. And I think that's been really hard to communicate to the public. So when I look at this initial graph there, where it looks at our vaccine rate compared to the nation, where we were really leading there for a month and a half and then falling behind, the challenges at those points were really, really different. The obstacles were different, and the time and space we're in. And we're at a very different time and space now than they were before. So I just wanted to highlight that. Second thing I wanted to highlight kind of in this graph and thinking about this is we have different tools within state government. Within DHSS, we are not the state pharmacy board. We're not the hospitals. We're not the medical directors. We don't make any of those decisions. Our role is to try to provide access, just as Elizabeth was mentioning, because there can be some significant access limitations, and information and resources so that people can make the best decision for themselves and what that looks like for themselves and their community. And so as we look forward, I think that there continues to be huge access issues. So in that initial surge, where we did really well was our partnership, particularly with the tribes, and getting access and getting vaccine out quickly. And that was honestly a super fun time. People really wanted it. People were excited. And we had tremendous partners who were dog sledding and snow machining and ferrying vaccine all around the state. But as people had questions, that started to change. It started to not become as much of an access issue. But I still think there's a lot of people where access continues to be a challenge. We still see people who are just beginning their series on a regular basis. And we continue to hear struggles. People are busy. They got work and family and kids and things to do. And going to make an appointment and setting it up is really challenging. But if you're going into, at your work site, having it available. So this top picture was, work that we've done with the fishing industry, because it's been such a high risk industry to get COVID and spread COVID really quickly, that the industry partners have offered it in those settings to make it as easy as possible. So continuing to work on access continues to be a huge thing that we're working on. The second picture, that really beautiful smiling face over there, is about thinking about context. The 1918 pandemic definitely shaped many people in the state's perception of disease, the threat of disease, but everyone's context and everyone's story is different. Data is incredibly important. I was a chemistry major, but also a fine arts minor, and we decide and we make things, our decisions, oftentimes based on stories rather than just on data alone. And what we continue to see is that Alaskans overestimate the risk of vaccine and underestimate the risk of COVID. And that is what I see every single day in the emergency department. The next picture, a little bit lower, is other traditional and trusted leaders in our community. So it's not just healthcare. Many of us look to things in our health like our spiritual leaders, our faith leaders, who help us to be spiritually and physically well, our community, our family. Cousin of mine, only her family is vaccinated. None of her friends and family are vaccinated, or none of her friends are vaccinated. Her entire community, besides her family, is vaccinated. And so it's very isolating. She's got a lot of really important questions. So, empowering other trusted leaders in the community to have access and to have resources to be able to offer vaccine if they feel like that is right for their community, and being able to share that. And then I think that these last two comments, I think, speak to a little bit where we're at today. 66% of unvaccinated adults think that a vaccine requirement is greater a threat to their health and safety than being exposed to COVID-19. And 77% said they don't trust federal government's guidance about vaccines. And I think that we need to speak in terms of the world we live in, not the world that we think we're in. And I think that these are really important and meaningful hesitations. And recognizing that, understanding that, recognizing a deep and very important desire for freedom, particularly for freedom of choice of your health, is incredibly important, and that we support. But what's heartbreaking is when we see people get so sick because some of the misinformation and fear about this then results in decisions that aren't empowering their health or their community's health overall. And so how do we break down through some of that noise? And then the last thing I just wanted to comment on is, just like that slide changes, this is all changing. There was a great article in Circumpolar Health just yesterday looking at vaccine thoughts and hesitancy across our rural regions and how much that can change over a period of time. And usually it's from trusted voices in your community, understanding the hesitations and the reasons for vaccine hesitancy, building that vaccine confidence, and continue to move forward. So I think we just need to continue to not think about this in a black and white terms, but access and trusted voices.
Yeah, good stuff. Elizabeth, as I am listening to Anne, I am reminded of conversations you and I had back in 2013 in the run up to the expansion or the launch of the federal marketplace and subsidies for individual insurance, and just the challenge of building trust in something new in healthcare. I wonder, and I'm also reminded about how unsuccessful it is to sort of look down on people and ask them, like, why aren't you being smarter? Like that is not effective at all. I wonder how you sort of think about the lessons, some painful, some hard-earned lessons in public health, like those 2013 conversations and many throughout the last decade, how those have informed or influenced your public health education work that you're engaged in today.
Yeah, that's a great question, and my mind's going a lot of different places. I mean, I think of like, kind of Anne just mentioned that over time, that vaccine hesitancy has changed in some of these areas, right? And there was a time when we thought, like, politically, we would never get Medicaid expansion across the finish line in the state of Alaska, and then one election flipped that, and 2 days later we were plotting how it could go forward, and we were able to achieve it. So I think that there's, Anne's talked about context in these pictures, that context is real and can change, and sometimes things that will strategically align that you never thought would align, and you have a moment and you can push through really important public policy that has meaningful effects and impacts on people's lives. And what we find with a lot of these kind of public policy measures, including, for instance, Medicaid expansion, the majority of Mat-Su people were in favor of Medicaid expansion. The majority of Matsu folks were in favor of clean indoor air. It took getting that alignment at the political level or through, just some opportunities that presented themselves to get those pieces of legislation actually, or to actually move that policy forward, either at the executive level or at the legislative level. So just, never give up is, I think, one of the things that I've learned. If it's policy worth enacting, it's worth pursuing. You might have to take a break and rest and be ready for when that opportunity comes, but the opportunity will likely come.
How do you, Tracy, think about your language when you're thinking about building trust around vaccines? How do you think about your language when you're talking about vaccines to a physician group or to a public audience? How do you sort of think about sort of level setting language in a way that builds trust most effectively?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, really, the term vaccine confidence, we've said a few times, it's really built around trust and, again, having those trusted sources, but then also, really having something to back up that trust. So why do you have that trust? So using data is one of the big things, following the science. And as Dr. Zink mentioned, the science is continuing to evolve. So, what we knew back in, March of 2020 or February of 2020 is completely, has completely, we've just gained so much more knowledge. So being, adapting messaging over time, it doesn't say that we don't know what we're talking about. It just says that we are following the science and, being able to kind of explain the newest and latest information that we have. So I think a couple, following the science and definitely backing up information with data. And then also just, helping people understand some of the process. So one of the things that, continuously comes up, and I'll address it in my slide, is just around people don't really understand the process of how our vaccines developed. We hear about them, they're developed, they're there, but we don't really think about it. But in this situation has really caused all this to come to the forefront. So there's a lot of education on, very complicated processes through FDA, CDC, vaccine manufacturers that most of the time people don't really think about. It just happens. So really trying to provide that information and in a way that people can understand and not get caught up in all the lingo of the government, that kind of thing.
Elizabeth, I want to tee up your slide here next. I'm not sure if you have photographs of the Chiefs in here because of their performance over the weekend or some other reason, but I'll let you take it from here.
That's quite serendipitous, but appropriate. So as I mentioned, DJ, Matsu has the lowest COVID vaccination rate in the state at 41%. Matsu also has one of the lowest childhood immunization rates in Alaska, which has the lowest rate of childhood vaccination in the US. So in our borough and state, we have a culture of distrust around immunizations that we've been trying to address for years. From our work to increase childhood vaccinations, we know that misinformation about the safety of these vaccines, it keeps spreading for years, even after false claims have been fully investigated and refuted by good science. One significant reason that people share misinformation, but also a reason that they refuse to get vaccinated for COVID, is that tribalism and our need to emotionally identify and belong to a group of people, it influences our thinking and filtering of information. So if you look at any human behavior choices, we often know what's good for us, but we don't do it. Our emotional needs, how we feel about something, and also our need to belong, it often trumps reason and rational thinking. And I'm not being judgmental here. Our need to belong is that significant. And so let me illustrate how significant. At Matsu Regional, we require unvaccinated employees to get tested every week to ensure they aren't sick with COVID. When the presidential executive order came out requiring COVID vaccination of healthcare workers, we found out that we had employees who had been vaccinated for months, but who were presenting as unvaccinated and getting tested every week, even though they didn't need to. It was more important for them to show or put a front on that, and that they were identifying with this unvaccinated crowd, even though they were vaccinated. And so as we think about how to increase the very effective COVID vaccinations, we need to address this critical need, this very human need to belong. Politicians and others are tapping into identity politics, have fostered much of this anti-vaccine movement. And they're tapping into this very basic human need to belong. And then they take that a step further by introducing legislation to combat vaccinations and reinforce the identity. We also have found that we have local radio stations here, privately owned, that they're tapping into these identity politics and refusing to air positive COVID vaccine ads. And as a result of really capitalizing on this need to belong, literally thousands of unvaccinated people continue to die across America. Lastly, people in our community are, as I think we're probably not unique in this respect, are largely getting their information from the internet in some way, shape, or form. The internet giants are getting blasted for sharing this information, and they are putting safeguards in place. Ironically, we found here at the Health Foundation that even when we tried to place social media ads supporting COVID vaccines, these safeguards actually often prevent us from sharing factual information as well. So I think we have some challenges in that arena that we need to address too. So kind of complicated, and I think that in moving this work forward, we really need to think about these challenges and how we address that very basic human need to belong.
Tracy, what are your thoughts when you see Elizabeth's slide and hear her comments?
So yeah, I mean, it's tough to see, and it's it's something, when I've worked previously in public health, it's really difficult to deal with a lot of that in misinformation because it is so deeply rooted, and just trying to be out in front of it as best as we can with the facts, and really just trying. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any solutions, unfortunately. I wish I did. But really just getting out in front of that misinformation and disinformation, and being a trusted source that can provide the facts.
And this idea of belonging and how tribalism impacts our politics and ultimately our public health decisions is I think really smart and very powerful. Any observations on how you think tribalism, or just maybe it's geographic or cultural rationale, might shape some of our public health conversations in some parts of the state?
I think it shapes it in all aspects of the state. I think that there is much more to our health than being vaccinated or being unvaccinated or being tested or untested. Belonging has huge health benefits from your social emotional standpoint. So, I mean, I think that this is very deep ingrained in us and incredibly important. And as Elizabeth mentioned, not judgmental. It is just who we are as humans. And I think we need to continue to do that. Within state government, I am not paid by any pharmaceutical company. I have no authority there. I have huge mistrust in government, huge mistrust in pharmaceutical companies. It's just weird to work in government now in that same space and place. But my tribe is Alaskans. And I think that we have really tried to focus on the tribe of Alaskans since day one. What makes Alaskans healthy and well? And so the information that we share is the information that we think are going to make Alaskans healthy and well. One size does not fit all, but we all have a shared experience of like the sun coming back right now. So when we talked about vaccines and the fact that they were really limited at the beginning, we didn't talk about the production process for vaccines. We talked about the sun coming back, and that initially it doesn't feel like enough. And then later it's going to feel like a lot more. And then maybe by June, there'll be more than we can handle. We want to get some sleep. And vaccines would feel similar in that same sense. And so we've really tried to share what makes us Alaskan in our messaging, because that is our common ground. Even though we have differences, those differences of voices is incredibly important. I so value when we're challenged. That's why we have public health echoes every single Wednesday from 12 to 1 to hear directly from the public and provide information directly back. And I think that we need to continue to think about our tribe of Alaska and how we make each other healthy and well, rather than our tribe of political, of partisan, of he versus she, of young versus old, world of health conditions or not having health conditions. We in Alaska have found amazing ways to be resilient together through earthquakes and fires and floods and pandemics as well. And I think tapping into that Alaska spirit has made us strong and will continue to make us strong as long as we stay focused on what brings us together rather than what tears us apart.
Great stuff. Tracy, I want to transition to your slide. I know you've got a disclaimer slide because you work in pharma, and pharma always has disclaimer slides. So walk us through what you have.
Yeah, so this is just a quick disclaimer slide. And so I apologize for having to show it, but it is important. And this slide I'm not going to read through it all, don't worry. It just describes the indication and the authorized uses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, which is also known as Comirnaty, and then details of the emergency use authorization, and it's noted in the EUA statement at the bottom of the slide. So if you have any questions or for more information on the vaccine, you can go to the website cvdvaccine-us.com and look at the EUA fact sheets as well as the prescribing information. So that's all I need to say on that. You can go to my next slide. And my slide kind of focuses in around vaccine confidence. And one of the big things around vaccine confidence, and being as I work for Pfizer and we're one of the manufacturers of one of the vaccines, vaccine confidence is really key for any new vaccine, but especially I think in our situation with COVID-19 vaccines. And one of the things that comes up around the COVID-19 vaccines in general is the fact that they were developed rather quickly. And there's a lot of concerns from individuals on, that fact. And just want to point out a couple of things. So we are in a pandemic, and the goal was really that lots of people came together. So there was a lot of collaboration on this effort to accelerate vaccine development without compromising any safety, efficacy, or the product quality. And utilizing sound science as well as meeting. So this FDA had set some pretty rigorous regulatory standards. So as I mentioned, it was really a collaborative effort. So this couldn't have been done without all the different pieces that were in place to help this happen as quickly as it was able to, while still maintaining the same standards for vaccine development. So just a couple examples, of how this was able to be sped up. So there was a lot of research already in place around similar viruses to the COVID-19 vaccine, so to the COVID-19 virus. So the SARS-CoV-1 virus, the MERS virus, there was a lot of research done on those viruses that allowed scientists to really move quickly in figuring out, okay, what type of vaccine do we need to develop? There was new platform technologies available, such as mRNA, which speeded development of the vaccine because you didn't have to grow the virus in a culture like you do for the flu vaccine. And then the COVID-19 vaccine candidates were all evaluated in large clinical trials. They had the 3 normal phases. However, what they did was they were able to overlap some of those phases to speed up the process. So the clinical trial phases were not skipped. They were just kind of overlapped in a new way in order to get the data and be able to submit to FDA for review. The other piece that I wanted to just focus on, and I think both speakers have mentioned, just around safety. So one thing to point out is just that once the vaccines are authorized or approved as they are now, vaccine safety continues to be monitored, and this is an ongoing process. And this happens for all vaccines, not just the COVID vaccines. But specifically related to COVID vaccines, from the clinical trial standpoint, the phase 3 clinical trial participants are followed for 2 years after receiving their second dose of vaccine. So there's data continuing to be followed on those initial clinical trial participants. And in addition, there's a lot of safety monitoring systems in place in our country. And these are through lots of different entities. So FDA, CDC, the Department of Defense, the VA, manufacturers have safety monitoring systems. And this allows both people to report in, so healthcare providers, individuals can report potential adverse events or side effects. And then there's also a lot of looking at data just to see, okay, is there anything coming up that might be unexpected after getting a vaccine? And just if you kind of remember back to the beginning, as an Alaska example, back in the first few doses that were given, there was concerns and there were reports about anaphylaxis after the vaccine. And, that triggered a very quick response from the government, from the federal government, from the manufacturers, from everyone was really just focused in on, okay, let's follow up this, let's look at the data and see, what this means and what we need to do. So, after that, there was additional safety measures that went into place around CDC recommending that observation time, 15 minutes or 30 minutes if you had a history of anaphylaxis. So there were a lot of steps that were taken as a result of that. So just something to keep in mind in terms of safety and we have these processes in place that continue to monitor the vaccines.
And I know a lot of the safety protocols and processes that Tracy's speaking to or referencing here are federal or led by the federal government. Give us a sense of how the state of Alaska plays a role. It might be outside of your department, but how does the state of Alaska think about safety when it comes to vaccines?
Yeah, no, I wanted to jump in because that story brings back a lot of memories. The state does not oversee vaccines. We don't authorize vaccines. We don't do independent trials on vaccines. But what we do is work incredibly closely with the federal government in this space. I think that's been one of the kind of eye openers for me, again, within state government. So when that case happened, so we had a press conference that day and we met numerous times that day. And we had an extensive meeting with some of the world's top immunologists and the clinician who was caring for that patient from his log cabin in his little Zoom, talking about what it really looked like from his perspective, and these world experts and us and immunologists from around the country, as well as the state of Alaska, all giving that input. So they were getting real-time information. And then the patient chose to be involved later and was sharing more information about her previous experience. She's been kind enough to share blood for months now on end to be able to understand kind of her reaction and what that looked like. So it was a really kind of cool experience for me to witness firsthand how the patient, the provider here in Alaska were just folded in to that understanding of the ongoing safety process. And we continue to do that on a regular basis. So if there's concerns, if there are highlights, if there's anything that comes up, there is this kind of really robust two-way conversation back and forth. Again, these vaccines are expected to be two things, safe and efficacious, but they're not perfect. Nothing is. Everything we do has risks associated with them. And it's trying to balance the risk of COVID with the risks of vaccination. And like I mentioned earlier, it's abundantly clear that there are still significant risks to COVID. I can tell you that every single day in the ER and what that looks like, even though we would all like to think that that's not going to be risky. And vaccines are safer than almost anything else we do in medicine. Honestly, I would have more heartache in telling all Alaskans to take ibuprofen for a week than I would to be vaccinated based on the safety and efficacy. They're safer than most over-the-counter medication. And I don't think that people oftentimes put it into that larger context of things that we do on a regular basis, thinking about safety and risk.
And just to jump in there, we don't evaluate risk individually very well. And just hearing about one of the side effects on blood clotting, but that birth control pills have, higher rates of blood clots among women who use birth control, but we're evaluating the risk, right? We evaluate the risk. It's much more risky, for instance, to drive to work and to get into a car accident than it is to get the COVID vaccine. And we have all the data that supports that. And it was really reinforced for me, and just in such a sad story that we got back from one of our local providers who a couple had been diagnosed with COVID, and the wife was in the hospital, and he was driving to one of our local clinics to get the monoclonal antibodies and had a car wreck and died on the way. And it just really hit that sort of risk. We're just very poor at risk analysis, and I was kind of amazed from the very beginning of the pandemic at the role that denial plays in our minds. Wait, is this real? Is this pandemic real? Is this really a big deal? Should we be taking this really seriously? It's going to go away, right? I was in so many conversations, in 8 weeks, right? It'll be over. And here we are at toward the beginning of year 3, still talking about it. And so really being able to confront our human denial and our analysis of risk is important for lots of decisions that we make in our life, but definitely has affected people's willingness to get the vaccine.
I wonder what you think, Elizabeth. Going back to my first slide, one of the reasons people don't get the vaccine, and talking now with two medically trained professionals about the science and the conversation here, 15% of respondents said that they had not received guidance from their doctor to get the vaccine. And connecting the dots from trust and patient information, medical information, and who would you go to? What do you make of physicians that might not advise getting the vaccine, or who might say they have no opinion?
Well, last week, the Alaska Public Health Association held its annual Public Health Summit virtually. And in your first slide, I saw or I think it was maybe Dr. Zink's slide, some of the data was from the de Beaumont Foundation, which really focuses on public health, having strong public health departments across America. And the CEO of the de Beaumont Foundation was one of the keynote speakers. And he said, and this isn't about politics, he said, state medical boards should be censuring doctors who promote misinformation about vaccines. It's that straightforward. And considering revoking their license. And so it was just, he had a very strong call to action of how we need to address misinformation coming from select doctors in the medical field, particularly about vaccinations.
If I may, DJ, and in some ways I would actually push back on that in numerous ways too. I mean, as a healthcare provider, if you want 4 different opinions, ask 4 different docs. Like in the healthcare world, we know how diverse those opinions can be. And I do think that it's really important that we maintain a place for freedom of speech for providers and patients, because one size doesn't fit all. That being said, there are people who are making money off of misinformation and disinformation. And when people are having, profit gain, be it from a pharmacy company or from misinformation, I think that needs to be investigated, and why it's really important that we have transparency in funding as well as those funding sources. But I think that we are balancing a really careful line here and making sure that we provide space for free speech, for dissent in that space, as well as being able to make sure that we have trusted information. Just like those slides that I showed, more people are afraid of the government telling them what to do or what not to do. And I think we need to make sure that we have freedom in our space between medical boards and state government to be able to share that information. Otherwise, we lose that trust. So I struggle with that comment from the Beaumont Foundation in that space because it can be a slippery slope. And I want to make sure that we remain trusted amongst our patients to have a robust conversation.
Well, I think that just
I think that's great perspective, but jump in.
I was going to say just a different perspective is, I think that sometimes, for any of the healthcare providers on the line, so I think sometimes healthcare providers don't realize the impact of their recommendation on patients. So even just a simple, like, I strongly recommend you get the COVID-19 vaccine today. Sometimes and that it doesn't just include physicians. It could be your local pharmacist. It could be the nurse. It could be, your school nurse. I mean, there's a lot of different people who are trusted as healthcare providers in our world, in our daily life. So for all those healthcare providers out there to really feel empowered to have those conversations and recommend the vaccine, because you can make a difference. And there's a lot of research out there, communication research, saying that healthcare providers are like the trusted source for medical information. So just kind of remembering that, kind of on a different side of that piece.
Great.
And also really taking advantage of those provider encounters wherever they happen. They might happen in the emergency department. They might happen, when you go for your annual exam and the physician saying, oh, you're not up to date on your shingles vaccine or your pneumonia vaccine, and have you had the COVID vaccine? And we don't, in the healthcare arena, we don't take advantage of all those encounters, which were really shaped and formed by another issue, to take advantage of these strong public health measures to make sure our patients are vaccinated for anything that they're eligible for and can prevent illness.
Yeah, just to chime in one more spot in there, I am shocked on that space all the time. We see that with, for example, alcohol. One of the most influential things is when someone comes into the emergency department with alcohol abuse and the provider says, I'm worried about your use because we're seeing some significant consequences. That can be the most single biggest event in someone's life to change their use of that. I think this has become so political and partisan. Many healthcare providers have moved away from the conversation because they're afraid to have the conversation, or they don't have time. They don't want to get into it. They don't want to get into a fight. But I try to ask every patient, do you have any questions about the vaccine? Just to leave it open-ended, to know that I'm not judging their decision either way, but I'm here as their resource. And I am amazed at how many times I go to discharge them for their ankle sprain or something else. And they say, I do have a question. And they ask a fantastic question, and we have a really great understanding of it. So I think continuing to reach people with compassion and open-endedness so that there is space for them to be able to ask these questions.
Great stuff. Great, smart conversation. I want to pivot to our last slide for just a second. This is a data set from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington. They're really one of the best modelers and best sources for information on COVID really in the world. They have aggregated this slide as of, I think, January 12th, but I can't tell you whether the data here includes data from the third round of shots, but nevertheless, for all of the vaccines that are available in the world today, including the 3 in green, which are available in the United States and being used, I thought this was really telling. For infection and severe disease, you can see the numbers in Omicron and Delta, the 2 strains we're primarily dealing with, at least today in late January. These vaccines continue to have very high efficacy against severe disease. And while transmission, there may have, clearly has been some degradation in protection against transmission, the protection against severe disease remains very high. And frankly, I believe, I don't know, but I think the reason that the data for death is not on here is because the protection against death remains really categorically high and at the top of the charts across these 3 vaccines. So let me just ask on this last slide, I know we're getting short time, any thoughts on how these mRNA vaccines have been performing, Anne, as you look at this data and reflect on the last 2 years?
Yeah, to build on something Tracy had said previously, it has been stunning to me to watch the scientific community across the world come together to understand this disease and find solutions, be it vaccinations and treatments. It is kind of like watching someone land on the moon. It has been one of the greatest privileges of my life to watch the science in this space. And I wish I could share that excitement with more people and to see what it looks like. No vaccine is perfect, but they were asked to do one thing, and that was to minimize the impact on severe disease and death. And that's the truth with all vaccines. And so when we think about risk, we think about the probability of something happening times the consequence of it happening. We just have a lot of COVID spreading. So the risk of getting it is still really high. And that's why we see a lot of people, even if they're vaccinated, getting COVID-19. We also are constantly in a race between this virus, and this virus will slow down. No pandemic lasts forever, but science is trying really hard to keep up. And yes, it's a race that we're watching right now between the 2 of them, and grateful for so many standing in there. But this will all slow down, and we'll have more tools that last longer and have more understanding moving forward. We understand so much more about this virus now than we did 2 years ago. We must apply 2022 resources to 2022 problems, and they're going to be different than what they look like in the future. But every day in the department, who I'm going to be admitting almost always depends if they're vaccinated and if they're up to date. The people I'm admitting to the hospital are not up to date on their vaccines, and they tend to be older, pregnant, immunocompromised, but we still see young people associated with the disease as well. But it is just striking to see what a protection. My 13-year-old daughter's boosted, and that child has had more close contacts in the last 2 weeks than I can tell you, because it is going around fast in her household. But, so far, knock on wood, she's still, symptom-free and doing great. She's low risk regardless. But man, it's great to have that protection, and it's great to have that protection for my husband, myself, my parents in that sense, in case she does bring it home from school, to minimize our chance of severe disease, knowing we still may get infected because it is so common, but it's going to really minimize my chance of severe disease.
We're getting short on time. I want to ask each of you one last question. And Elizabeth, I'll start with you first. We got a lot of politics. We got a lot of stuff in this pandemic. We're all kind of worn out, if for nothing else than the weather and the darkness and all of that stuff. What gives you hope when you look out at 2022? What sort of inspires you to keep doing the work you're doing, Elizabeth?
Well, it's, I think in some respects, what you just talked about in terms of the vaccines and what Anne shared about the science is really a celebration. It's a celebration. And we when we talk about the pandemic, we always talk so negatively, but a lot of great things have come out of the pandemic. And it's made us rethink a lot of things, from remote work arrangements all the way to, how science has come together to produce a vaccine in record time to protect literally millions more people from dying across the globe is just remarkable. So what motivates me is a love for our community, a love for Alaskans and the people who live here, and just being able to rub shoulders and work with just really remarkable colleagues like Dr. Zink and you all here today.
Tracy, how about you? When you look at 2022, what gives you hope for the year ahead?
Yeah, unfortunately, they're so, my co-presenters are so eloquent. They've kind of taken a lot of my my thoughts as well. But I think there is a lot of hope, and just thinking back to just a year ago when the vaccines were first coming out, and just the remarkable advances that have occurred, and just the knowledge that we've acquired. I think we are gaining more and more, and things are happening quickly, and we're able to respond. And then I think selfishly, I mean, my background is preventive medicine and public health. And I think, it's inspiring to me to see people understanding what public health is, and the importance of public health. So those selfishly on my part, that is what keeps me going. I'm, public health physician, and, to see people really getting, empowered and excited and committed to improving public health in their communities is great for me to see. And, I hope that I can kind of continue that in my own work. But it's, there is a lot of negative, but there's a lot of positive as well. And I think we need to focus on that.
And 2022 still has 11 months and 10 days or thereabouts. What gives you hope as you look ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Alaskans' ability to be resilient and kind and so amazingly thoughtful in this process. I've learned more about the seafood industry than I ever would have thought in this process. And they had a whole season last year with whole companies that never had a single case. We have seen businesses be able to transform. We have been able to see the ways that Alaskans have been able to find ways to be resilient and support each other, from food on the doorsteps to, pick up over-the-counter testing at your school or your local library to find ways to be together. So this is really Healthy You 2022. And I want to make sure that we take that new partnership, that energy, the science that we have, and really find ways to be healthier and better together, and excited to really launch into that. 11 months doesn't feel like enough. We've got lots of fun things to do this year.
Healthy You in 2022. I love the little rhyme there. Ann Zink, MD, the Chief Medical Officer for the state of Alaska. Tracy Fu, also a medical doctor, the Vaccine Medical Director at Pfizer for the Northwest and Alaska, and Elizabeth Ripley, the CEO at the Mat-Su Health Foundation. I appreciate each of you making time to be with us. That's it. Thanks for our show, and I appreciate you being here. And I'm sorry I didn't ask questions. I know there are a lot of them, but I want to just keep teeing up stuff for these guys. We'll have this show at our site, stateofreform.com. Thanks for being with us, everybody. I appreciate it.